Staying on this story, the UN Security Council is expected to sit for an emergency meeting today to discuss the deadly clashes in the DRC. Fighting in the area has intensified this year, with scores of civilians killed. Several countries, including the UK, France and the US, have called on their citizens to leave Goma. Now, as a story of SANDF soldiers who have been killed in active combat with M23 rebels in the DRC unfolds, I'm now joined by defence analyst Dean Wingrin. Dean, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for speaking to us. And the important question is, what business do we have doing war in the DRC when it appears that the SANDF do not have the necessary resources, not only to defend against the M23 rebels, but also to defend themselves?
That's a very good question, and it's one that all parliamentarians should be asking this. In 2013, you remember we were in Central African Republic, and we had the Battle of Bangui, where about 15 South African soldiers were killed. And a number of lessons should have been learned from that about deploying South African forces far from home without the proper support. And it appears that those lessons have not been learned. In the meantime, South Africa's defense budget has reduced quite considerably. And there should be a lot of questions asked. Exactly what are they doing there? There's a lot of rumors as to self-interests of politicians and mining interests. A lot of it comes from the rebel groups themselves and Rwanda, who supports them, the M23 group. But even within South Africa, it has never really been answered, that question, whether there are self-interest from politicians. But South Africa, being a large economy, one of the largest in Africa, it does have a responsibility to the rest of Africa to try and peace and to grow the economies of those countries, and obviously, by implication, the economy of South Africa. But you should only do that if your defense force is properly capacitated to defend themselves. And if you cannot do that, then they shouldn't be 3,000 kilometers from home.
Now, Dino, I want to focus a little bit on the M23 rebels themselves as a force, right? Now, we talk about rebels, and the general expectation is that you send in an army such as the SANDF along with the other SADC forces and the Democratic Republic of Congo's own forces, and you should be able to overcome this particular force. But this hasn't been the case, evidenced by the fact that from what we understand, the SANDF force and others were surrounded by these M23 rebels. Just how well capacitated are they, and how do they manage to do so?
That's right. Well, it's a very nuanced situation there, in that South Africa has actually been in the DRC since 1999 under the UN mandate. So we've got a lot of experience there. And M23 is the major rebel group. They, for intents and purposes, they're supported and equipped and armed and trained by Rwanda. And there's even UN reports saying Rwandan soldiers are actually integrated into M23. Now, I think it was about 2013, in South Africa's first Roy Falk attack helicopters arrived in theatre, were sent into operations for the first time, and they had such a devastating effect on M23 that they effectively gave up for almost a decade. In that space, Rwanda has invested considerable time and effort and money and resources into upscaling the rebel group. And it's not a ragtag rebel group that we think of from 10, 15 years ago. They're very well equipped. They've got sophisticated weapons. They've got guided mortars. They've got surface-to-air missiles and so on. And in the meantime, South Africa has air support, no longer has the Roy Falk attack helicopter. They're reliant on civilian international logistics companies to transport all our troops and equipment there and back. And so the timeframes to reinforce our troops there there's quite a long lead time. And they just haven't been, the troops that are there at the moment, they're running out of ammunition. They don't have a proper, the bases themselves are in incredibly vulnerable positions. They're surrounded by high ground, which is held by the rebels, and they're very vulnerable, both in Sake and in Goma, which is the capital of the North Kivu province. And they're incredibly vulnerable there. And I don't believe that they have the sufficient equipment to support themselves. Even basics such as toilets and hot food is in short supply. Never mind, protected accommodation.
We also understand, Dean, that even the mortuary facilities were not available when these 9 soldiers unfortunately passed away.
Yes, the South African troops, I mean, they are well trained, and they did put up a brave fight, and they're continuing to put up a brave fight. But the situation is very, very difficult for them. DRC has been on the momentum for the last about 2 weeks, and since the breakdown and the ceasefire, and they have been gaining more and more ground, and just particularly in the last 2 days, they've been attacking the government strongholds of Sake, and just 25 kilometers away is the capital of Goma, both places where South Africa has bases, and effectively they are all surrounded, and they are doing very well to protect themselves. But they shouldn't be placed in that position, I don't believe, in the first place.
So 2 options one would imagine, Dean. And the first is get resources, equip the SANDF troops and allow them to fight for themselves and obviously fight for the people of the DRC. In the absence of that, and we know that there have been massive budget cuts for SANDF, should Parliament be talking about pulling the soldiers back, pulling them out of the DRC?
Most definitely. If you cannot properly capacitate your soldiers, give them the weapons and the training and the logistics to support themselves, then I don't believe they should be there. We've got a far greater threat on our eastern borders in northern Mozambique. South Africa had a head of force is also participating in SADC force there, which they've since terminated. And the strange thing there is that Rwanda was also in Mozambique at the request of the Mozambican government. So the SADC there, that I believe didn't work. There wasn't a lot of communication between the SAD forces and the Rwandan forces within Mozambique. So that has now terminated from the SAD's point of view. But the threat is still there on South Africa's borders from ISIS. And so I think the parliamentary committees, the defense committees, must have a serious discussion with the government, with the Minister of Defense and the Defense Force, as to exactly what can be done for our troops there. I understand that additional troops are going to be sent to the DRC in support. Haven't received absolute confirmation of that yet. But if they cannot be supported, then yes, I think they should be brought back.
Final question is the issue about the numbers, or is the issue about the artillery, and armory and all that the SANDF soldiers need in order to be able to protect themselves? And I also gather that the Defense Minister, Andrew Mtecha, was in the DRC not too long ago.
That's right. She actually arrived in theatre, I think it was Wednesday. And I don't believe it's very much of a coincidence that M23 launched this assault on Sake and Goma on Thursday while she was nearby, still in Kinshasa. But yeah, it is something that desperately needs to be looked at.
All right, Dean Wingrin, defence analyst, appreciate your time. Thank you so much for speaking to us this afternoon on Newsfeed, the PM edition. And he does say that the challenges with the South African National Defence Forces allow for two options. One obviously is that reinforcements to be sent through, apparently inadequate at the moment, or calls that should be mounting for the troops to be pulled out of the DRC.